Hiya folks, today we're going to be talking about the proliferation of people's self-diagnosis of mental health issues, why this is happening, why people have become so attached to them, the dangers of being so attached to these self-diagnosed mental health issues, and some solutions for what we can do about this. Let's get straight into it. The dangers of mental health self-diagnoses: labeling, looping, concept creep, and signaling. So here's the questions that we're going to be covering. Don't worry, we're doing this very, very briefly. Why do so many people actively seek and then trust and depend on mental health self-diagnoses? Why, when challenged about these mental health self-diagnoses, do they become defensive? What purpose do these diagnoses serve for the individual? And are we better off in a world of terms from therapy and mental health? And then what are the dangers of that? The reason why people are actively seeking, trusting, and then depending on these mental health self-diagnoses, I believe, this is my personal opinion, is that interpersonal trust and trust for authority is declining. People are moving, generally speaking, most people are moving towards a state of despair in the face of the chaos that they're presented with. And this has probably been going on, I would say, since 2001. I think you can track a growing sense of despair in the face of the complexity and chaos as we move forward. People can't rely on old narratives. They can't rely on religion in the numbers they used to be able to in a postmodern age. And so they need something else. This lack of religion and lack of spirituality and lack of trust means that people can't be, they can't be patriotic, they can't be nationalistic. There is no governing narrative inside of which they can reliably, hide, comfort themselves, exist, for want of a better term. So people's sense of living with a meaningful narrative is also now severely damaged. So why actively seek and trust and depend upon a mental health self-diagnosis? It provides several very important functions. One of them is a stronger sense of self, a stronger sense of identity. I can't identify as a Christian anymore. I can't identify as a Buddhist anymore in the numbers that we used to be able to, and with the sincerity and the passion that we used to be able to. So we need something else. We need a new sense of identity. And we also need a narrative. This is absolute. You must have a sense of self, and you must be living inside of a meaningful narrative. All humans need this. It also, finally, offers meaning and a way of being seen. So we have needs. Human beings need certain things. We need meaning. We need to know that our life, our sense of who we are, is meaningful, and we need to be seen by others. What does it tell you about the state of the world that we're in now, that we would rely on labels of mental health sickness to offer us meaning and a way of being seen by others? That, to me, would suggest we're probably in certain senses, through a certain perspective, in a pretty desperate state. Labeling, looping, and signaling. These are important concepts. I'm not going to dwell on them. We'll go through them very, very quickly. These are all ways of identifying why, if you challenge somebody, particularly I've found with younger people who accrue mental health self-diagnoses the way we used to collect Pikachu when I was a kid, or, baseball cards if I was American, or so, they just collect these things. Why do people generally, but especially younger generations, become so defensive? Number one, labeling is a cognitive distortion. It refers to taking a singular attribute, usually negative, about another person or about ourselves and turning it into a global absolute. So if you say, I am depressed, or I have depression, that particular attribute would serve as a self-label that would be globalized, and your understanding of who you are functioning in the world is as a, when people answer questions and they say, well, as a woman, or as a father, or as a whatever, as a identifier, and then they go on to say this. So in the mental health self-identification field, mass psychosis, people would say, well, as a depressed person, or as a person with trauma, or as a person with CPTSD, this is what I think. The distortion, however, is obviously like a cognitive bias or a logical fallacy, a false way of seeing the world. It's a inaccurate way of seeing the world. So you know that you're living inside of an inaccuracy, and that creates cognitive dissonance because you're holding two dissonant thoughts in the same place that counteract each other, and it's enormously stressful. That stress will then manifest as, how did I write it? A prickly attitude to the topic. So you raise like, how do you know you're depressed? Are you depressed all the time? You say that you have ADHD. How do you know? Do you have it all the time? When you're doing something that interests you, do you find the ADHD disappears? Do you find that your ADHD only shows up when you're doing something boring, like reading a book on biology or history? And the attitude can be a little bit defensive. That's because of the cognitive dissonance that's created by filtering reality through a faulty lens, a cognitive distortion. In this case, labeling. Looping is an interesting concept. I got this from Jonathan Haidt's book. He got this by reviewing the work of a man called, an Australian man from the University of Melbourne called Haslam, who was referring to another man called Mr. Hacking, I think it's Ian Hacking, who wrote in 1991 about the idea of looping. And the assertion was that the way the authority creates a classification of being affects the people who fall into that classification of being so that they fulfill the needs of that classification of being, creating a loop between the diagnoser and the diagnosee. You are depressed. Depressed people love to eat scrambled eggs. I am depressed, therefore I am suddenly feeling like I should eat scrambled eggs. It's a really silly way of describing it, but it's something like that. As is written here, the idea is that classificatory practices induce reactions in the members of the humankind by enabling new intentional ways of being and of acting. So, as I say, it's a self-identity loop between diagnosis and then acting as if the diagnosis were true. Humans, this is again is not published research, this is my personal prejudicial solipsistic opinion. When you treat people as if, it's like they have an unconscious instinct to behave that way. So if I treat you like you're weak and sensitive and incapable, you'll just start being weak and sensitive and incapable. If I just treat you like you're strong and capable and responsible and just go, right, bang, just go ahead and get on with that, it increases the likelihood that you will respond that way. It's a kind of performative, ceremonial, almost religious or magical thing where you're like, this is your role. You are the person who is good at this. Yes, I am the person who is good at this. That's how looping functions. The final concept that generates defensiveness is signaling. Signaling is a really interesting concept from evolutionary biology. I recommend at least taking like 7 minutes to go and read the Wikipedia page on this because it's really insightful, especially if you use the internet, which you do because you're here watching this on the internet. So it's a concept from evolutionary biology about how animals let each other know their respective worth, their status, whether they're ready to mate, whether they're dominant or submissive, so on and so forth. And it immediately goes into honest signaling and false signaling. But let's just take the overall concept of signaling for now. It's not a direct communication. I can symbolically show you something about myself performatively that allows you to infer my status within a dominance hierarchy. And you might say a dominance hierarchy. We're talking about kids who claim to be depressed or claim to have anxiety. Yes, but in psychology now, I actually just found this out myself today, at least going back to 2015, is a concept called competitive victimhood, CV. So there is a dominance hierarchy for victimhood. Well, I'm depressed. Yeah, but you're depressed, but look at fucking Brian. Like you're like bougie depressed, to use the language of the kids. You're bougie depressed. Brian's for real depressed. He's got the real, and so you're competing. I remember seeing this when I was a kid, when I was at boarding school in like when was that, 91, 92. And the goths and the crusties would be the ones who'd hang out together and, you know, smoke and cut themselves, and they'd all be pierced and whatever. And they would compete for who had the most depression. They'd compete for who did the most self-harm. So you can have a thing called competitive victimhood. So even when you say like, what, like a male deer is supposed to signal to a female deer that he's extremely virile and good for producing mates. Yes, that's a deer. Humans are much more perverse creatures than that. We can make fetishes of anything, and we can invert anything. So we have competitive victimhood. So within the concept of signaling, me letting you know in a certain context, particularly relevant to social media, that I'm super duper uber depressed and extremely anxious, actually gives me status within the dominance hierarchy of people who are fighting to be the most depressed. Yeah, you like that, I can tell. Okay, so what purpose does the self-diagnosis serve? I've already given you some indications of that. It gives you a place in the dominance hierarchy, gives you a sense of self, gives you an overarching narrative to live by. Here we go further. I usually do. They are also a calling card, a signal, a signifier, and an identifier. You are my people. I can go onto your Instagram profile, your whatever social media profile, and you write, you know, Capricorn, INFJ, depression, CPTSD, boom, I can instantly know who you are. They let you know all about me rapidly, which is, in an age of digital narcissism with very, very low levels of attention, it's good to have instant signals, instant identifiers, instant symbols that let you know where I am on a political, cultural, social spectrum. They give the user, the person doing the signaling, a comforting narrative structure, much like religious structures do. There isn't really time to get into this now, but you'll notice with many religious structures, not all, it actually has the same effect as choosing your own mental health self-diagnosis. So in the Abrahamic tradition, you could say, it sucks now, but I'm special. Like, life is full of suffering and I'm persecuted. But I know I'm special. I'm one of God's chosen people, and I'll be rewarded in heaven. And you might say, well, what the hell's that got to do with self-diagnosing yourself with ADHD? My life is hard. It sucks now. I'm special. It's still a moderately rare diagnosis to a degree. And one day it could be cured. One day it could be fixed. Built into the narrative of illness is cure. So, and you might say, but loads of these never get cured. I know that, you know that. But at the unconscious level, when a problem is medicalized, it's sort of symbolically, hermetically sealed inside of a problem, reaction, solution vessel, if you like. So there is redemption. There's redemption written into the source code of it. Even if the people using it, if you said to them, there's redemption written into this, they would say, no, there's no redemption. It's like, well, you've identified an illness that you claim you have, which means unconsciously, at least, you're acknowledging that there will be a cure, or you are hoping for a cure one day. A world of therapy and mental sickness. So are we better off in a world that uses terms from therapy and mental health? In my humble opinion, and I say this guiltily as somebody who has for the last 8 years helped in the agenda to popularize mental health terms, no, absolutely not. It has made us much, much sicker. But isn't it more compassionate and kinder? You know, if somebody has ADHD or they have depression, isn't it more compassionate? Isn't it kinder if we know that, if we are #trauma informed, and we're all working around and making allowances for that? Well, yes, in a naive utopia of fawns, unicorns, and talking lions, yes. But in this world, the world I live in, the world of the demiurge, evil exists, and evil is opportunistic. and evil can be large or it can be small. Under these circumstances, how do you think people are going to resist the temptation to send out a dishonest signal about their actual mental health status so as not to be rewarded for it? Because we're making it rewarding. People with mental health diagnoses are given allowances. They're given more time on exams. They're given more percentages on exams. They're allowed special breaks. They're allowed, all kinds of things. So it's advantageous. Is it naively and utopianly more compassionate and kinder? Yes, it's more compassionate and kinder than a reality in which we deny that anybody is sick and deny that anybody has depression. But I say again, that's an extremely naive way of looking at the world. And it's also black and white thinking. There aren't just two options. Either we're fawning, oh, so compassionate, what do you need, anything, oh, you have a thing. Nobody has ever had a thing and lived with a thing. People have been living with suffering of all kinds since the dawn of human consciousness. Fact. They coped, they managed. We don't have to shut everything down because one person feels slightly outside of their comfort zone. The other side of that coin is not a harsh, tyrannical, disciplinarian, I'm not interested in your suffering, shut up and get on with it. That's absurd. It's a childish and infantile response to the problem. We need something that is integrated. We need something that meets in the middle and says, look, some people suffer more than others. It's very hard to know because we don't have blood tests. We don't have urine tests for this. Some people are more capable than others. That's life. That's nature. Some people are taller. Some people are shorter. Some people could even be genetic. I don't know. Some people might be born with more resilience or more of a preponderance to neurosis or anxiety. None of us know. The answer isn't fawning submission to the single claim of anybody who ever says that they're uncomfortable. That's not an answer. In the same way, the answer cannot be total dismissal of any claim of suffering. But we must not be naive and utopian. We need to have a degree of cynicism, of realism, of practicality there and say, okay, how do we make this functional? Some people are suffering. Some people need allowances. But we can't just all fall down because one person is suffering. We need to move forward. We need to make it functional. Game theory is the last thing I wrote here. So in any game, in any system, in any structure, if we say, oh, well, it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, and say you have 100 people, and one person is the squeaky wheel, and they're laying it on a little bit thick because they want to get the grease, they want to get the attention, they want to get the help, they want to get the allowances. What if all the wheels start squeaking? What if every single wheel realizes that that's the way to get things done and that's the way to get ahead in life, and then you have competitive victimhood? Will there be any grease left? I would suggest no. I would suggest that this mode of looking at the world lacks philosophical rigor. Nobody's thought what the long-term consequences of this would be. Yes, you feel kind and a good and charitable soul because you're such a good person now, in the moment that you're helping somebody in need, good for you, but it's not a way of structuring order in a system that's going to move forward and thrive into the future. It's not functional. The dangers. I think I've hammered the dangers, so let's keep this brief. A world obsessed with its own malfunction and focused on its own weaknesses creates more weaknesses and malfunctions to justify the pre-existing narrative. You all know what that means. A world where subjectivity trumps objectivity has no future. What does that mean? Well, your mental health diagnoses, it's all self-reported. As I said, I can't look with a stethoscope in your ear and see anxiety. So your mental health self-diagnosis, you're telling me you're anxious. That's completely subjective. I have no way yet of putting on like a helmet and going inside of your body and scanning the somatic field and going, you know what, my dude, I know you think this is anxiety and there's definitely anxiety here, but you are actually really sad. You're fucking chronically sad right now. That would be cool, right? Somebody who knew what the somatic feelings were, who was emotionally literate, could enter your somatic space and go, yeah, I see why you think this is anxiety, but this isn't anxiety. Anxiety is tertiary here. There are way bigger issues here, right? We can't do that. So it's all subjective. that means that we prioritize the lived experience of the individual, which is fine in a therapeutic context. It's no way to organize an education system, a workplace, or society at large. The lived experiences of individuals are important for writing poetry, for doing dream analysis, and in therapy. Outside of that, they are meaningless. Meaningless. Compassion and justice are incredibly important. Of course they are. Who wants to live in a world with no justice and no compassion? That would be awful. That would be a horrible, horrible hellscape. Compassion, wonderful. Justice, fantastic. These are ideals. They tend not to occur spontaneously, which is why we have to be disciplined and why we have to actually set up groups and organizations and have a justice system and enforcers of the justice system to make sure these things play out. They are incredibly important, but they must never take precedent over objective facts. They have their place in a hierarchy. Compassion and justice can never be placed above facts, science, history, and truth. That is a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake. And I claim the psychologizing of the world and the psychologizing of culture has caused this damage. So people like me who've popularized psychology terms via social media platforms like YouTube have actually made it worse. I think I've actually made this situation worse. One last point on this. Every mental health professional, please hear me. You must reject this impact trumps intent notion. It sounds kind. It is kind. We used to say something, or they used to say something similar in neurolinguistic programming, which is the meaning of communication is the response that you get. It's actually very empowering for a communicator, for a stand-up comedian, even for a therapist, to keep in mind, because it's like Marsha Linehan's notion of radical acceptance, Jocko Willink's notion of extreme ownership. You keep the agency at all times. If you're like, whatever the client understood me to have said, that's what it meant. So I need to, good. In therapy, with a professional who knows what they're doing. But out there in the world, you mustn't spread this meme that impact is more important than intent. Because, again, it works in Narnia, where there are fauns and unicorns and talking lions, and in a utopia. But in the real world, there are bad actors who act in bad faith. We call them narcissists, we call them psychopaths, we call them histrionics, whatever you like. There are bad people out there, they act in bad faith. And if you set up a rule, and you go globally for everybody, impact trumps intent. Okay, fine. So somebody says to me, good morning. And I say, you racist. How dare you? Racially abuse. Well, I just said good morning. Well, that may have been your intent, but the impact on me was the most savage racial abuse. How are we going to live? How's the tribe, how's the village going to function if everybody acts that way? And you would say, well, everybody wouldn't act that way. Don't open the door for it. Impact does not trump intent. If the psychologist says something, if the therapist says something to the client, and the client takes it the wrong way, the impact and intent is 50-50. We've got to sit there and say, look, I'm an adult, you're an adult, you're not a child, and I'm not your mum. When I asked you how you feel now about your alcohol consumption, it wasn't a judgment, it wasn't a criticism, it wasn't a condemnation. I'm sorry if you heard that, but I need to know, in order to help you improve your mental health, whether you're getting shit-faced every night like you were when you started therapy 6 months ago. These are facts. I need to know them, kid. You can give them to me or you can't. But tell me the truth. So the impact is the client got very upset because they felt criticized and judged, but the therapist needs to know. So impact and intent, let's give that 50-50 responsibility, not say things like impact trumps intent. It is utopianly a wonderful notion, but in practical terms, in the real world, it's a recipe for a disaster. The solutions, these are our best chances. We must increase executive function, which means a focus on the skills and the strengths of the individual. There's executive function in biology, there's executive function in neurology. which I guess is biology, but let's say it. There's executive function, the concept in neurology. It's interesting. I don't get it. It's interesting and I don't get it. I don't get anything in neurology. That's tough. That's hard science. I like to keep it soft. There's executive function in psychology. The two cross over. They cross over in interesting ways, all joking aside. It's worth going and looking up what executive function covers in psychology. Look it up. It happens to include the capacity to emotionally regulate. It happens to include the ability to concentrate and retain skills in the short term and the long term. Interesting. We should be focusing on increasing the executive function of clients, of children, of people in the world to make them more skillful and stronger. We should encourage robust attitudes about life, the self, risk and danger. Otherwise, we're just all going to become a bunch of frightened ninnies jumping at our own shadows. That's no way to live. That's not a way to live. This mortal terror of risk. It's pitiful. We must be stronger than this, and we must be training people to be stronger than this. Humans, adults, are not children to be protected. They are adults to send out into the world to explore and to thrive and do well. In joy, in happiness, and in the red-blooded expression of their will. Otherwise, let's just give up now. Let's just all crawl into the Matrix pod and have Netflix and Uber Eats, injected direct into our bodies through the Matrix pod. I mean, it's a pitiful approach to life. Please resist all temptation to overprotect and to overmother clients, students, and people generally. People are not children. They must learn to grow up. Everybody must learn to grow up. And that is a painful process. And you can't protect people from that pain. You can't. All the people you love will suffer. The end, deal with it. You can have a little cry. You can say, fuck you about me. You can go and punch a pillow. All the people you know and love are going to suffer. And that's part of life. And if they're strong and they're resilient, they'll be stronger for it afterwards. We need to reintroduce a healthy approach to competition and to justice. The way we are about justice now is really creepy. It's hyper-fetishized, it's unrealistic, and it is polluted with emotionally dysregulated perceptions of how the world should work. It's not adult, it's not sane, it's not healthy, and it's not realistic. We need to bring competition back. Healthy competition is a good thing. It is part of life, it is part of biology, it is part of nature, and it's not going anywhere. You want to create a post-competitive world? Good luck. Good luck. Human nature is what it is. We don't live in Narnia. Reintroduce a concept of individualism that is not steeped in consumerism. The problem that we have now, I think, is because individualism has been so tainted. This is more of a philosophical, maybe even a cultural, sociological point than a psychological one, but let's cover it briefly. We've got to reimagine the individual. We've got to reimagine and reconceptualize individualism. Yes, it's disgustingly, toxically tainted now. Many of the problems that we see in the world, that we say, oh, it's narcissism is everywhere, actually isn't. It's actually very well covered by rigid individualism. And you would say, this is hair splitting, this is sophistry, it's the same thing. It isn't. It isn't. Narcissism and rigid individualism are distinct in crucial ways, crucial key ways, and we're conflating them to our cost. We're seeing narcissism where it isn't, where you actually can explain it with rigid, toxic, self-obsessed individualism. But what makes the individualism toxic? Consumerism. We're constantly plugging the person back into themselves, their own desires and pleasure. That is a recipe for disaster. If you want the fastest route to poison a human being beyond redemption, pleasure them continuously. Offer them nothing but pleasurable feedback. Their whole structure will be destroyed and you'll make a monster of them in no time at all. That was a philosophical point. It nearly became a rant. But you see, my impulse control was to pull it back. I stopped. We also need to improve our relationships with ourselves. I don't know why this isn't more popular. As the cult of compassion and justice grows, I don't know why we're not encouraging people to be on friendlier terms with themselves. It makes me very suspicious because it's such a simple concept and so functional. It works so well. It's almost as though we're encouraging people to have a very frail sense of self, but yet to be self-obsessed, but to seek the solution in collective activist movements instead of becoming healthy individuals who have a strong relationship with themselves. I have just released a new course. It's called the Loving Inner Guide course, and it seeks to do two things. It seeks to, with no jargon, there's no jargon, it's super, super easy course, step by step. Improve your executive function to a level where you can actually get on in the world and to the level where you can go through coaching and go through therapy. I've only realized in the last 6 weeks that people's executive function, many people's executive function is so low that coaching can't stick, therapy can't stick, books, seminars, videos, none of it sticks. If your executive functioning is really screwed up, you are really wasting your time. And you'll get frustrated and you blame yourself. And that's what I saw people doing. People were like coming and going, I'm not healing fast enough. And they're furious and they're angry with themselves. They're angry with the healing process. They're mad at their counselor. They're mad at and I'm like, whoa, just calm down. What's happening? Now, I'm not a neurologist, but according to those good people, there may actually be a case for saying that some people's executive function is so low that the brain is not physically capable of doing what some of us, like people who create course content, like me, life coaches out there, counselors out there, psychotherapists out there, they're actually physically in the meat, in the flesh, in the brain, they don't have it. So we're being like, oh, just go ahead and do, deadlift 200K for, 3 sets of 10. And they're like, I can't even do a quarter of that. But we're like, oh, what's your problem? Are you disciplined enough? Blah, blah, blah. And they literally can't do it. So we must improve executive function. The Loving Inner Guide course does that. And it also seeks to help to improve your relationship with yourself. This is specifically for people who've been to therapy and that they backslide, or they go to counseling and then they get pissed off with the counselor. They find themselves falling out with therapists, falling out with counselors, falling out with the counseling process. A lot of that is due to poor executive functioning, because the counselor and the therapist, it is frustrating if an instructor, or let's just call them instructors, like if an instructor is asking you to do something you just can't do because nobody ever trained you to do it, you'll get irritated in the end. You will get enraged with them and with yourself. So this course helps you to do that. You can go and check it out on SpartanLifeCoach.com. The link is below. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. And I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Cheers.